Welcome to the Arabesque Sewing Studio. I'm Ali Phillips, and in this video we're going to be making the Cottage Table Flower Coaster. Now this is the third in a series of 3 free coaster patterns, each one stepping you up gently in skills and technique to build your confidence at the sewing machine. So far we've made the Cottage Table Square Coaster and the Cottage Table Circle Coaster, each one introducing some new skills, and today I'm most excited about showing you the Cottage Table Flower Coaster. So this one steps beyond simple shapes into something a little more creative and playful. Once again, the construction is slightly different. We're going to be adding some raw edge applique to the centre and a different kind of embellishment to the flower petal. This is where I'd really love you to experiment with pattern and style, because you'll be amazed at the different looks you can come up with by playing with that flower centre and different fabrics for the flower itself. There's no wrong combination, just do whatever brings you joy. Yes, this is a free pattern, so you can grab your free pattern by clicking the link in the description below. Now, if you love educational sewing projects that help you grow in your skills and your confidence, I'd love you to give this video a like and hit that subscribe button. So if you're ready to make your flower coaster along with me today, grab a copy of your pattern and your supplies and we'll get started. So let's talk about the tools you're going to need today. So I recommend that you have 3 different pairs of scissors. We're going to use these for different purposes. So I've got a large pair of shears here. These are really sharp and these are great for cutting out fabric and giving you a great deal of control when you're doing that. Now I've got a small pair of really pointy sharp scissors here. Now I use these at the sewing machine when I'm trimming threads, and the short blades are just perfect for giving you a lot more control when you're trying to do something fine like cut a thread or maybe cut into a seam and just do a little clip. And lastly, I have a pair of paper scissors that I use for cutting out my templates. Make sure you don't use your fabric scissors for cutting out paper. So I've got a ruler or a tape measure for marking and measuring. I've got a quick unpick or a seam ripper, and this is just really essential when you're learning to sew, and even when you are a competent sewer, seam ripping is just part of sewing. It really helps you get things accurate. Whenever you need to fix a mistake, one of these is awesome. Now I recommend that you have a fabric pen that you're comfortable marking on your fabric. So this is a friction pen and this is a chalk pen, and there's a whole range of different markers that you can use, but usually you can just use whatever you've got lying around the house. Now I've got some basic pins for pinning the fabric together, and I've got a large iron needle that's going to accommodate my perlate thread when we're doing the decorative hand stitching. So one of these needles just makes it much easier to thread this thick thread through. I've got some regular sewing thread, so this can be polyester or cotton. Just choose something that's going to match well with the fabric that you've got. Now the couple of decorative elements we've got today, I've got some really cute cotton lace. I'm going to be using this to make a wraparound tag feature. So you just need a scrap of lace that you're happy to do this with, and ribbon would work as well. Now I'm going to attach a little button on top of the lace at the end of this, just for an extra little decorative feature. So I've had a lot of fun with this. I've grabbed a little bow button. That's just quite unusual, and it's going to add a lot more fun to this project. And I've got some perlate thread, which is a heavyweight thread that is great for stitching by hand. It's nice and glossy and it shows up really well whenever you're wanting to do a row of hand stitching. So choose a colour that's going to coordinate really well with the fabrics that you've got. And once again, I've got an iron and my pressing mat. Now this is really essential for getting a professional look to what you're sewing. Now, once again, I recommend that you read right through your pattern at least once and take some notes. Take note of how everything's laid out. Pay attention to the piece names. Let me draw your attention to this diagram key that I have here. So each stitch that's shown in the diagrams, each has its own little pattern, so you can recognize what's normal machine stitching, top stitching, basting, and where you fold things. The right side and the wrong side of the fabric are also shown as different colours. The interfacing and the fleece are also represented with its own key. So pay attention to this, because this is going to be teaching you how to read these diagrams and understand how they're put together. Now, as you go through the pattern, make sure to tick off the boxes as you do each part of the step, so you can keep track of where you're up to and not miss any steps. So go ahead and print out your templates from the end of the pattern. Make sure your printer is printing at 100% full size, and double check that your scale square measures exactly 1 inch by 1 inch. This is really important to make sure that everything ends up the right size. So cut out all your template pieces with nice even strokes, doing your best to stay exactly on top of that black line. Now, the more accurately that you can cut your pieces out, the more accurately you're going to be able to trace them and then cut them and sew them. So I've got 3 products I'm going to be using today inside this coaster. So this is Fusible Fleece. So you should be familiar with this from the earlier 2 coasters that we've made. This is a fusible backing product with glue on the back. And we're going to use this inside the coaster for a lovely layer of softness and loft. Now, 2 new products that we haven't used before. So the first one is Fusible Web. So this is a paper-backed product that has glue on one side, and then you fuse the glue onto the back of your fabric and peel the paper off. And this turns the fabric into a fusible patch. So we can use this for applique, and it's really super handy. So we're going to be using this Fusible Web today for fusing the center of the flower in place. This one's called Pellon Wonder Under, and the code is 805. There are quite a few brands that you can use to substitute for this if you can't get this one. Now, this is probably my favorite interfacing of all time. So this is Pellon SF101, and this is a woven fusible product. I use this product anytime I'm sewing with regular woven cotton. This just stops your project from stretching and helps it keep its shape. And it doesn't change the texture of the fabric when you put it on behind. So this has glue on one side and you fuse it onto the wrong side of the fabric. So we're going to be introducing this one today as a backing for the flower, and you'll see that this just really helps the flower keep its shape and gives a really lovely crispness to it. So this one is Pellon SF101, but there are other woven fusible interfacings that work just as well if you can't get this. So let's have a look at this fabric range today. I've got a range of really pretty fabrics here today. Some of them are ginghams and checks, some of them are florals, and some of them are solids, or at least semi-solids. So you can really have so much fun putting together a look that is your personality. You can have a different look on the front to the back, and just by having a plain flower pattern with maybe a floral center or maybe a gingham center, you can just switch things up and just have so much fun experimenting with the different looks that you can get. Now, when we introduce the little lace tag that we're going to add and the button, this just really takes everything up another whole notch. So I just really encourage you to have a lot of fun with selecting this. You can use fabrics from thrifted items. You can reuse fabric from old clothing and thrifted items and just come up with some really beautiful combinations of your own flower coaster. So today I'm going to be sewing my flower coaster and making it double-sided. So this means that you're going to cut out a second flower center and putting it onto the back of the fabric so that you can use this front and back. So I'm going to be using this range of fabrics for my coaster today. This is going to be my back, this is going to be my front, this is going to be my front center, and this is going to be my back center. And I think when I pair this with the lace and the floral button and the lovely raspberry perlate thread, that this is going to make a really beautiful coaster. So once again, every piece in this pattern has a name. So this is the front, and this is the back, and this is the flower center that you can see on both sides. So here's all my pieces, rough cut and laid out. I've got my back and my front, I've got my 2 centers, I've got my fusible web, 2 pieces of that, and I've got my woven interfacing and my fusible fleece. So we've got 4 templates here today. We've got the flower coaster front and back fabric template, we've got the interfacing and fleece template, and we've got the stitching template, which we're going to use right at the end for tracing our hand stitching line. And then we've got the flower center, which is for the fusible web and the fabric. So if you would like to do 2 flower centers, you're going to cut 2 of these. Now I'm going to start once again by pressing all of my fabrics flat. So remembering that pressing is about using downward pressure to remove any creases and also to shape and set your fabric how you need it to be. So we're not pushing or stretching the fabric. We're using a nice firm downward pressure, and every time we move the iron we're actually releasing the pressure and lifting it just slightly. It doesn't need to be off the ironing board, but basically just gliding across the top of the fabric. And I like to give my fabric plenty of steam in this stage because that really helps release any fibres, creases in the fibres as well. So go ahead and press every piece that you've got here until it's beautifully flat and crisp. So now lay both of your fabrics wrong side up, and we're going to trace the flower coaster template into the middle of the fabric. So once again, give your template a good amount of pressure with your fingers near the edge. Make sure that you're pressing down nice and firmly so that you're not moving the template as you go around. And make sure you can see that line really clearly. Anytime you need to stop and adjust, just make sure that you're not moving it. So then I'm going to repeat this for the back. So we're going to be turning this coaster right side out through the front of the coaster today. So I want you to take a pin and I want you to poke a hole in these 4 holes that we have in the front of this coaster. Just make it fairly big so that you'll be able to mark through this hole with your pen. So now I'm going to recenter this coaster on my front fabric, and I'm going to mark each of these holes. Just check, lift it up and check that you can see all of those marks nice and clearly. So these marks are going to show me where to cut when I'm ready to turn this right side out. So now I'm going to take my fusible web and my flower centers, and I'm going to set these aside for a later step. So now take your fusible interfacing and your fusible fleece and your interfacing fleece template, and we're going to trace around this as well. So make sure that the glue side on the interfacing is facing down, and then repeat this for the fusible fleece. So now grab your fabric scissors and we're going to cut each of these pieces out using nice, long, even cuts with the scissors. Once again, don't shut your scissors mid-step to avoid having any jagged edges. We want everything nice and smooth. So go ahead and cut the remaining pieces out. Now take your flower coaster back and lay it wrong side up, and then take your interfacing and we're going to lay this with the glue side down right in the center of the back piece. So just take your time to get this as even and central as you can. You want to try and match up these valleys with the valleys on the fabric as you go around. Then you're going to take your iron and we're going to press, so make sure you're not moving that interfacing as you go. And we're going to hold that on there for a few seconds before we move it on to the next section. And then just double check, just by gently trying to peel it up a little bit. Just check that everything is fused securely over the whole thing. Now we can fuse this woven interfacing directly because it's 100% cotton. So now we're going to take the fusible fleece, we're going to lay that over the interfacing with the glue side down. Now this time we need to protect this polyester product. So take a scrap piece of fabric, lay that on top, make sure that you're not moving anything. And then we're going to press that again. I like to give it a bit of steam and just keep it in place for a few seconds at a time. And then just double check once again that those edges are stuck really well all the way around. This is a step I really recommend that you try this time. So to get a really beautiful even stitching line the whole way around this coaster, I recommend that you retrace your batting template once again. So lay it over the top of the fleece and the interfacing layer, and then just trace a really clear stitching line that you're going to be able to follow. Now you can also try and just follow the edge of the interfacing, but sometimes once you've got this under the machine, just having a line to follow just really helps you keep on track, and particularly helps you stop with your needle down to pivot in the valley of each petal, which is really important to getting your coaster to look nice and even. So this is a step I always like to do, particularly when I've got something that's a little bit of an uneven shape like this flower coaster. So now we're ready to pin the front and the back together. So now take your flower front piece and lay it right side up, and then take your back piece and lay that on top. Now if you've got any directional fabric here, so maybe you've got some lines or stripes going a particular way, just pay attention to whether you want your front and your back aligning in a particular way. So my pieces don't really matter here, so I'm just going to align these so that the raw edges are matching up exactly. And then I'm going to grab some pins and I'm going to pin through all of these layers, poking my pins out perpendicular to the edge here. And you can really put in as many pins as you would like as you go around. So just make sure as you go that the edges are staying aligned. And if you put a pin in that's shifted everything a little bit, just take the time to take that out again and realign everything and put it back in. So now I'm ready to take this to the sewing machine. I'm going to set my stitch lengths to 2.5 millimeters. I'm going to sew around the line that I've marked, and every time I reach a valley between the petals, I'm going to stop with my needle down. I'm going to lift the presser foot and then adjust the work so that everything's sitting straight and flat again. Now as you're sewing around a curve, you might find that you need to stop fairly often and just readjust everything to be nice and flat and straight again, so don't be afraid to take it slowly. So when we get back to the beginning of where we started, we're going to backstitch and cut the thread. So it is really important as you come up to a pin to stop and remove that if it's in the seam allowance, because you don't want to sew over a pin and potentially damage your needle or even break it. So now we're going to trim down our seam allowance by about half, and this is just going to really help these curves be nice and smooth and even, and reduce the bulk inside of the coaster so that the edges are nice and flat. So using your small scissors so that you've got more control with those shorter blades, just trim all these seams right the way around. Now another really important step we need to do here is to clip into the seam allowance at each of the points in between the petals. So we're going to snip right up to that stitching line without snitching through it. So it might be helpful if you flip your coaster over so you've got the front now on top. And very carefully with your sharp pointy scissors, these are perfect for this because you've got so much more control. You're going to just snip that point apart. So clipping into an internal point helps the seam spread open fully when it's turned right side out. This will prevent puckering and tension at the joints. So you'll be quite amazed if you don't do this little clipping step here. When you turn this right side out, your coaster will be all puckered and pulled at each of these points. So now I'm going to draw an X on the front of my coaster and connect the dots that we marked earlier. So you're still using your small pointy scissors. We're now going to pull these layers apart. So make sure that you can feel that there's a good separation between these layers because we only want to be cutting this front layer here. So I'm just going to do a really small clip to start with, just on one of those lines right in the center. Now I've opened up just enough of a space here that I can slide my scissors in, and I'm going to trim along each of the lines. So now we have a hole in the center of the front and we can turn this project right side out. So just gently open this up and grab the back fabric and just start pulling and pushing all of this through. This will be a little bit easier than the circle one that we did because this opening is going to be a little bit bigger. So just push till you can see it all come out, and then we're going to start defining each of these curves by putting your finger into the hole and pushing all those layers apart. So you work your way around, just giving each of those petals a bit of a scrape with your fingernail. Just get some shape back into this. So then I'm going to start rolling these seams between my fingers and just trying to get that curve as smooth as I can and get those layers starting to sit right on the edge there. So remember, what we're after is we're wanting the front to sit right on the front and the back to stay on the back, and this seam line, the edge of the seam, to be exactly on the edge. Now I want to make sure that all the points on this hole that we've got here are sitting nice and flat and they're not tucked inside. So grab your iron once again and we're going to do some pressing. Now this really is the magic part of sewing. I just love how pressing just makes all of this come together. So you're working on both sides. Going to give it a good amount of steam, and then you're just going to look at your work here and just see whether any of the curves can be improved just by rolling everything between your fingers. If you've got any layers that need to be tucked around to one side, just work your way at it. That's looking really pretty already. So taking the time to get this really crisp is the difference between a sloppy looking sewing project and one that looks really crisp and professional. So now take your flower center and lay it wrong side up. So for this second piece, because I'm going to be making 2 flower centers, this one doesn't really have a right side or a wrong side, but they are different. So one has the little spot showing and one has the little pink dot showing on this side. So in this case, you're just going to pick which side you'd like to be on the outside. You're going to lay the right side down and grab your fusible web and center that in the center of the fabric with the glue side down and the paper side on top. And once again, just hold that in place for a few seconds to get that glue to fuse to the fabric. So then grab your flower center template and we're going to cut this circle out of the center of it. So then you're going to lay this circle on the center of the fusible web on the paper side, and you're going to trace around that. So now you can go ahead and cut these out. Now once again, I recommend using your small scissors whenever you're going to be cutting out something that's a little bit more fiddly. So now we're going to remove the backing paper from this patch that we've created. So this can be a little bit tricky sometimes depending on how well your paper has stuck. So if you're having trouble getting these layers apart, you just want to slide a little pin in between the layers and just try and pick them apart so that you don't end up ruining the nice crisp edge that we've just cut out. So peel that backing paper off. So now grab your pressing mat and your iron, and we're going to lay this coaster with the front facing up, so the hole is facing you, and take your flower center with the glue side facing down, so the right side is up, and we're going to center this by eye over that hole. So just take your time to examine it all the way around and just see that you're happy with how it's sitting. Now it doesn't really matter if you get this off center, because that gives a really charming effect as well. So when you're happy with where it is, you're going to just press your iron down in place, hold it for a few seconds, and then you're going to check that that is nicely stuck in place. I'm pretty happy with that. Now I'm going to put this one on the back. So I'm going to also center this by eye, make sure I've got the glue side down. Now I do want my centers to line up as best as I can. So I'm just going to hold this at eye level for me so that I can see both of these at a time and just check as best as I can that I've got my centers aligning. And then I'm going to press this side in place. So now we're going to stitch what the fusible web has temporarily held in place with what's called raw edge applique. So raw edge applique is a technique where a fabric shape is stitched directly onto another one without turning the edge under. So this means the edge might fray slightly over time, but this adds beautiful charm and character. So here's where you can experiment with different stitches for doing this. So you can use a regular straight stitch to do this, or you can set your machine to zigzag and sew right on the edge of this as well. Or you can even experiment with some of your fancy stitches that your machine might have. So this is a great time to try out some of those. Now I'm going to stitch close to the outer edge of the circle, but I'm not going to mark anything this time. I'm going to go around several times, and each time I go around I'm going to stitch on a slightly different line, so that I end up with several rows of stitches that all sort of look slightly uneven, but add a little bit of extra personality to this. So here's how this is looking, and I'm really pleased with this. It's actually caught both sides really well, and I really like the effect of the uneven circles. Just adds that really handmade charm. So now grab your flower coaster stitching template, and you're going to center that over the flower again, and grab your fabric pen. Just do your best to get this in the center as evenly as possible. And we're going to trace around this stitching template. And this is going to give you a lovely line to follow for your hand stitching. So I've got my large eye needle threaded here with my perlate thread. I'm just going to tie my 2 seconds quilter's knot and then trim that end pretty close to that knot. Now make sure you're starting on the front of your coaster, and I'm going to put my leather thimble on, which just really helps push everything through. So I'm going to come in on the top in between those layers and bring my needle up on that marked line, anywhere will do, and bring it all the way through. And then I'm just going to give that a short sharp tug and pop that knot in between those layers. So you want to be able to pull hard enough to get it in, but not too hard that it comes all the way through. So then just follow your way around that line with running stitch. So this means we're weaving the needle in and out of those layers so that there'll be some stitching on both sides. And you're going to aim to get your stitches as even as possible so that you're happy with the way they look on both sides. They don't have to be the same on both sides, but it is really helpful just to try and keep an even line going. And you might find you need to do some subtle space adjustments and lengths just to make this all join up nicely as you go. So don't be afraid to stop and take a few stitches out if you're not happy with how they're looking. But once again, the idea of this is to just sit and enjoy the slow stitching process of creating something beautiful. And it's going to be imperfect, but that's the point. It's made by a human, not a machine, and it's going to look really beautiful. I've just taken out a few stitches here as I come back up to the beginning, and I'm just going to stitch these a little bit shorter now so I can try and get this stitching line to follow one complete row of stitching so that you can't see where I've started and stopped. So I've just shortened these slightly shorter, and that's going to look really good. So on the front there, I've got one continuous line of stitching. Now on the back here, I need to finish this last stitch. So I'm going to tie a knot close to the fabric, but not right up against it. Basically about the length of a stitch away. Then I'm going to push this back in just through the middle layers again, so once again not coming up on the top. And I'm going to bury that knot by giving it a sharp tug and then trimming that thread right up against the fabric there. So the final little bit of embellishment that I'm going to do here is to add a little ribbon or lace tag and a button over the top of that. So just cut 3 inches long, and then we're going to press these edges into the center. And I'm going to take my fabric glue and I'm going to glue the ends and base them in place. This is where the glue is really handy because it can keep those fraying ends in check. Glue right on those ends and just get that all to stay in place. So now take your coaster and you're going to decide where you would like your tag to be. So you can put this right in the middle of one of the sides, or you can put it over to one side near one of the valleys. So I think I'm going to put mine right in the middle here. So I'm just going to fold this around and just have a bit of a look from both sides. I think that's going to look really cute. And then you want to check, looking at it from top and bottom evenly, to see that you've got those edges folded over equally. So I'm going to grab my glue and glue baste both sides in place, and then grab my iron and set that in place and press it from both sides. Now here's where you can take this to the sewing machine if you would like, and just stitch across that end and catch both ends at the same time on that lace. Now I'm going to grab my cute little bow button that I showed you earlier, and I'm going to stitch this in place and hold that lace in place like that. So I'm going to thread my needle with my regular sewing thread, line up those ends and tie my quick knot. This time I'm going to wrap the thread around about 4 or 5 times. Make sure my knot is nice and tight, and trim off the end close to that knot. So then I'm going to start on the back of the work and bring my needle up just part way and sit that button on the center there, and just check that that's aligning where I would like that to be. So then hold the button in place, pull the needle right through, and then bring it back down through the second hole. So now I've got one complete stitch done, and I can just keep going up and down through the layers. Now it's up to you how many times you go around and around your button. A good amount is probably about 5 times. But as this is a decorative button, it doesn't need to be secured as well as a functional button would need to be. So when you're happy with how secure your button is, we're just going to flip it over and tie a knot a couple of times up against that lace. And then bury that thread end again in between those layers and cut the thread. So there we go. We have one flower coaster all finished off. Has a beautiful center on both sides, has some lovely hand stitching around the edge, a very cute little lace accent with a little button sewn on, and this is just looking really charming. Congratulations on finishing your Cottage Table Flower Coaster. If you've sewn along with me today, you should be so proud of where you've come from and what you've made. This is the final project in my Introduction to Sewing series. In this series, we've learned to sew some straight lines and some curves, how to construct things with different methods, how to sew layers and add interfacing, and how to add embellishments that add your own flair to a project. But more than all of this, you have built some real confidence at the sewing machine, and this is what makes you a sewist. If you know someone who would love to start their sewing journey, I'd love you to share this video series with them. These projects are a great way to begin. Thank you for joining me in the Arabesque studio today. Happy sewing, and I'll see you in the next video.